This is Miss Boo.
When I was 22, I asked Death a question I should never have asked. I asked her if I was going to kill myself. But to explain why I asked that, I have to go back to when I was 7. I can see Death. The first time I ever saw her, I was in the 2nd grade. My school had turned the cafeteria into 2 extra classrooms, so we all ate lunch at our desks. I was sitting at a small round table with 2 friends, trading snacks and talking about what game we were going to play during recess. I was just about to bite into one of my crackers when another kid ran up to our table and asked excitedly if those were peanut butter crackers. I nodded once. He smiled and said he had Starbursts and asked if I wanted to trade Starbursts for peanut butter crackers. Even as a 2nd grader, I knew that was a ridiculous deal, like trading a diamond for a rock. So I quickly shoved the crackers into his hand while he happily dumped 4 Starbursts into my lunchbox. I remember feeling proud of that trade. I unwrapped the pink one first, my favorite, and put it in my mouth. I had barely chewed twice when a scream tore across the classroom. Kids stood up from the corner table, crowding around someone on the floor. It was the boy who traded with me. He was on the ground, twisting and gasping, clawing at his throat while his face swelled and turned red. The teacher rushed across the room and grabbed him, asking what happened and what he ate. The boy pointed toward the crackers. The teacher looked at the label, and her face turned pale as paper. She shouted that he was allergic to peanuts, and ran out of the classroom carrying him, while yelling for the nurse. The entire room went silent, except for a few kids crying. A couple minutes later, another teacher came in and began leading everyone to another classroom. I stayed at the back of the line, staring at the table, at the empty cracker packet, the one I gave him. I turned toward the cubbies, thinking maybe I could hide behind my backpack. I didn't know if 2nd graders could get arrested, but I was sure I had just killed someone. I stopped when I noticed someone else in the room. Long black hair dragged across the floor like spilled ink, skin pale as paper under the fluorescent lights. She wore a black suit with a dark grey shirt and a blood-red tie. Her shoes tapped softly as she walked around the table and picked up one of the bitten crackers, the one James had eaten, the one I had given him. I ran over and grabbed her pant leg, crying that I was sorry and that I didn't know. She didn't react. She just traced the bite mark on the cracker with one pale finger. After a long moment, she crouched down and placed her hands on my shoulders. When I looked up, I nearly screamed. She had no mouth, no nose, just 2 empty black eyes. Not pupils, not eyes, just black voids, like holes in her face. She stared at me silently until I tried to pull away. Then she stood up and slowly walked toward the door. I followed her. She stopped outside the nurse's office and watched through the small window. Inside, I could hear the teacher crying and blaming herself. When the door opened, I hid under a bench. The teacher said an ambulance was on the way. The woman slipped inside the room before the door closed. I rushed in behind her. James was sitting on a bed, struggling to breathe, but calmer than before. His eyes were fixed on the woman. He could see her too. He tried to move away as she reached out and touched his cheek, then gently stroked his hair. His body relaxed, as if she was comforting him. A tear rolled down his face as he whispered that he wanted his mum. The woman leaned forward and pressed where her mouth should be, against his forehead. A silent kiss. His chest rose and fell in a long sigh. I watched her stay beside him until the paramedics arrived. I watched as they carried him out. I watched her climb into the ambulance and sit beside him. James never came back to school. The second time I saw her, I was in 5th grade. 2 sisters were arguing on the playground about who was braver. One of them climbed onto the monkey bars and balanced on top while everyone cheered. The other girl pointed at a massive oak tree in the corner of the field and said she could climb it. The tree was enormous, 40 feet tall. No one had ever climbed it before. Everyone ran to watch. The girl slowly climbed higher and higher while the crowd cheered. Halfway up, I felt that same cold feeling crawl down my spine. I turned around and saw her again, the woman, standing behind the crowd watching the girl climb. I tried to get her attention, but she ignored me. I turned back just as the girl reached the first branch. Everyone gasped as she pulled herself up. She laughed proudly and stood on the branch. Then she climbed higher. A teacher shouted from the hill, telling everyone to leave the tree. Kids started walking away, but I stayed frozen, watching the woman watching the girl. Something was wrong. I shouted for the girl to come down. She refused and climbed higher. In panic, I grabbed the woman's arm, begging her to stop it. She slowly lifted her hand and curled her fingers inward. 5, 4, 3, 2. The girl fell. The sound when she hit the ground was horrible. Screams erupted around us. I stared at her twisted body. The woman walked over and gently touched the girl's face. She closed her eyes as if giving the moment peace. After a minute, she stood up and gave me the smallest nod before disappearing behind the tree. Over the years, I kept seeing her at car crashes, at accidents, at the worst moments of people's lives. Always the same woman in the black suit, always silent, always watching. The last time I saw her was in a hospital room beside my grandmother's bed. My grandmother was 92, weak and pale and fading away. My parents stepped out to talk to the doctor and I walked into the room. The woman was already there, sitting beside the bed, watching my grandmother breathe. I asked if she had to go. No answer. I asked how much longer she had. Silence. My grandmother started coughing, and the woman gently pulled the blanket around her shoulders and wiped the sweat from her forehead, like she was made of fragile glass. Then the woman placed her hand over my grandmother's heart. Her shoulders dropped slightly. She leaned down and placed another silent kiss on my grandmother's forehead. My grandmother took one last breath, then the heart monitor flatlined. I whispered, "Thank you." Later that night, I sat outside the hospital smoking a cigarette when she appeared beside me again, looking up at the stars. I asked why I could see her. I asked if she had a name. She pointed at the sky. I looked up and said, "Moon." She didn't correct me. We sat there in silence. I joked about how smoking would probably take years off my life. She raised 3 fingers. My smile faded. I started asking how I would die. Car crash, murder, fire. She looked amused at my ridiculous guesses. But then I asked the question that made everything go quiet. Am I going to kill myself? She froze, completely still, her head tilted slowly, as if she was studying me with something close to sadness. And in that moment, I realized the answer.
If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe, because the next one might be even worse.